as you mentioned, we talked a little bit beforehand about various questions and explorations, and we talked about the false yearning for certainty.
Right.
Your book, Endgame, is almost like a mathematical term. If you know what the endgame is, you know what to do today. Do you see an endgame out there for the world economy that makes sense?
The endgame is we've got to work through the excess debt. That's always the end game when you have excess debt.
In the developed countries.
In the developed countries, that's where the excess debt is now. I mean, when you've had excess debt in undeveloped countries, you end up, they either print money or they collapse. I mean, they have a currency issue. Just because we're the developed countries doesn't mean that we can't get over leveraged, doesn't mean that we can't run deficits, doesn't mean that our policies won't work. You can't have too much leverage. I mean, people point to Japan at now it's like 230% debt to GDP. Well, they've taken 2 generations worth of savings and they've put it into that. They've reduced their private savings to, their private debt significantly, which, has its own consequences. They've increased productivity amazingly in Japan, even as their demographics were running against them. So they've been able to maintain their capital structure, their GDP, but they're running out of savings. Their demographics are against them. Japan will have its own end game. France is no different than Greece. We will be talking about the French end game within 3 to 4 years. If you were the conservative right in France and you wanted to play the long game, you would let Monsieur Hollande take over, because on his watch is going to it's as Sarkozy hands him the keys, he's going to say après moi les déluges. Here, take the keys, because that debt, those massive amounts of government guarantees and pensions that cannot be made, can't happen. And, as one of the great minds, Herb Stein, said, if something can't happen, it won't happen. I get the question all the time, John, what about the $75 trillion worth of unfunded liabilities in the U.S.? And I said, well, that's not really an interesting question. And, you get that startled look and you go, I said, no. 75 trillion will never happen. Can't happen. Mm-hmm. The more interesting question is, what happens when we realize 75 trillion can't happen? What happens then? Because at that point, does it happen in 2013 when we can still do something about it without the bond market jerking our chain? Or does it happen in 2015 or 16 when the bond market's jerking our chain? We have to make cuts far deeper than we could ever imagine, raise taxes far more than we would ever imagine, and it scars a generation. Mm-hmm. We in the U.S. are lucky enough that we can probably get out of it. Germany can get out of theirs. The French are like 4th or 5th in line. Spain has a real problem, as we were talking about. I'm much more worried about Spain. The austerity that's going to be required from a country that's already got a huge part of its GDP as government spending. They've got 50% unemployment in the young people, 20% overall. A monster portion of their GDP had been construction, which is not going to come back for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. There's fundamental basic issues going on in Spain.